Hi, my name is Steve Rahi. I am a customer engineer focused on management technologies. Today's discussion is part 6 of an ongoing series focused on configuration profiles in Microsoft Intune, which of course is part of Microsoft Endpoint Manager. Today's focus will be on administrative templates. So here's our agenda. As we get started, we want to talk about what are administrative templates, why do we care about administrative templates. Then we're going to look at the requirements of administrative templates, how they work. In general, we'll walk through a couple of configuration examples. I'll show you a few specific examples of working with administrative templates, and then we will wrap up with a few tips and tricks. So what are specifically administrative templates? Right. Well, administrative templates really referred to as Admx templates, administrative templates, Admx backed templates. You'll hear it all of the different ways. Basically, they are policies that are built in Intune and delivered through the MDM channel, but they're based on the kind of Admx policies that you would typically do configuration on through group policy, right? So Admx back policies, again, one of the ways you can refer to them, will contain the metadata from Windows group policy and can be edited to supply the same kind of configuration settings that you would normally deliver through group policy. And it would be the same kind of editing experience that you might have with the local group policy editor or the group policy editor on a domain controller, and you'll see that as we go along. Each administrative template is going to specify the specific registry keys and the related values that are associated with the group policy, and will define the policy settings that can be managed. Again, very much like group policy, except it's being delivered through MDM. So MDM templates basically will help organize your group policy settings into a hierarchy, which then can be easily searched, is the idea, in different categories. Again, very similar to local policy, and you'll see that in just a moment. In fact, this is the hierarchy example that I'm just trying to show you here on the PowerPoint. Then I'll show you this more in a minute. So Admx back policies or administrative templates are going to contain thousands of settings. So these could be OS settings, and typically will be things that are shipped with Windows. These are going to be the policies that are largely found under computer configuration / administrative templates if you're looking through the local policy editor. Not limited to that. You'll see that in just a minute, but typically found there, right? Application settings will also be here. So separate from the operating system, usually downloaded to a PC and found in local policy, again, under administrative templates. You'll see these as well. Things like configuring Edge or configuring an Office, one of the Office suite programs. Those are out there as well. And you'll see the policy focus areas are here, and certainly more than here, but these are some of the big ones, right? And then another thing, what are administrative templates? I say GPO analytics. I'm not intending to say that they are the same thing. GPO analytics is not the same thing as administrative templates. But GPO analytics is a tool that is built into Intune that will help you analyze your group policy settings and migrate to the equivalent settings in Intune. Largely, that migration will result in security baselines, administrative templates, kind of settings catalog type stuff, and some of the things you'll see here, right? So not going to focus on GPO analytics. That's separate discussion, but definitely focus on what you can do with administrative templates. So kind of think of it maybe as jumping ahead a little bit of GPO analytics and getting to where the rubber really meets the road. Right? That's the goal. Okay. So why do we care about administrative templates? Well, it's really easy, right? Modern policy management. Being able to take those things that are really important for you, managing your devices in your organization and translate those to the equivalent kind of management of policy, but now using a modern management type of option such as MDM. When I was discussing this with a customer, they asked me, "Well, should we really use Intune to do this, or should we maybe do some of this configuration with Config Manager?" And I asked them, "Why would you think about doing it with Config Manager?" The answer came back, "Well, because Config Manager can access things like the on-prem AD organizational units, whereas Intune cannot." And that led to a really interesting discussion, which is, as why are we even thinking about moving away from on-prem GPO, right? If we were able to really sustain on-prem GPO, then things like organizational units would also make sense. And kind of the way I phrased it in that answer to that question is, GPO is great if you rewind the clock 10 years. But we are, no, and in that 10-year period, it was great whenever we had all of our managed devices on-prem, joined to the local domain because they were on-prem. But in today's world, we are more and more seeing a disparate workforce that is remote, where we need to be able to manage those devices in the same way. And the only way to effectively use group policy in that config is to have users that are either on-prem or dialed in with VPN. Well, that's becoming an increasingly less attractive scenario for organizations and for users. And especially with what we've seen recently with COVID, the acceleration in remote work has really brought a spotlight to this. And so anything that maintains an anchor to on-prem Active Directory is the wrong direction, right? And so the idea of using organizational units going forward is really an on-prem type of solution and maintains that connection to on-prem. And for that reason, that's why I would not use Config Manager. Certainly, I wouldn't use it if the reason to use it was the tie-in. And really, the truth is, Intune does a tremendous job of deploying policy, managing policy. That's one of the things it really excels at. In the co-managed world, one of the top two things that would be moved over from Config Manager to Intune in terms of management would be compliance settings and policy. And so it just makes a whole lot of sense to shift that workload to Intune and let Intune really do what it's good at. And policy is one of those things. Could you do it with Config Manager? Absolutely. Through the Cloud Management Gateway, you could manage these devices totally unjoined to Azure Active Directory. You could, but Intune really is where the investment's being made for things like that. And so, summary of that discussion is, yeah, you could do it with Config Manager, but that would tend to keep an association with on-prem AD, which is not what we want to do, and it would also be a direction that is not really where the product groups are headed. So Intune is the way through MDM. That's what's being built. That is what's built. And that is what's considered modern policy management, which is why we care about administrative templates. Okay, so what are the requirements to use? And by the way, that could be a lot longer discussion too. That's just a summary kind of what we discussed, right? So what are the requirements of using administrative templates? Well, there are a few. You need Windows 10 1703 or better to be able to do this. You do need appropriate M365 licensing, either E3 or E5, and then the MDM authority set to Intune to be able to effectively use these policy configs. So how does this whole thing work? Now that we've thought, okay, we're going to do this thing, we're going to go down the road of administrative templates, we want to see what's here, kick the tires, see what's available, right? Well, so a few things in the how it works category. Administrative, I'm going to say that wrong. Administrative templates are built into Intune, largely. There's a tremendous number of Intune, administrative templates built into the Intune UI. You will see them in a minute, right? There's bunches of them. And so I can't show you all of them. I'm not going to even try, but I am going to give you a good sense of what's out there, right? So a tremendous number built into the Intune console. There's no customization required. All you need to do is configure what you want, right? And you can use these templates kind of as a one-stop shop to manage all of your Windows 10 devices. Now, does that mean that there's complete and total parity from what you have in local policy of a domain controller or even a local Windows 10 PC to, is there complete equivalence between that and what you have in Intune? The answer is no, right? There's not, right? There will be a gap. There will be possibly some things that you will want to configure that are not in the ADMX UI. Does that mean you can't configure it? No, you can, right? There is a way, it's called ADMX ingestion, where you can take an ADMX file and bring it into Intune and then deploy it to all of your managed devices and then create policy to allow you to configure that. I'll show you that in a minute. One thing to be very clear about, though, as we talk about this. So you'll hear me say ADMX, and so that will probably mean to you that we're doing group policy stuff. And that makes sense, right? ADMX is a part of group policy. But be clear, the policy that we're configuring that looks like group policy in the Intune console, as I'll show you in a minute, that is not group policy. It is not ADMX. It is policy that is delivered through what's called the policy CSP, right? And onto the device. It does that completely independently from any group policy thing at all, right? So, and I realize as I say policy CSP, let me explain that for a minute. So the way the MDM solution works is there are a whole series of configuration service providers, right? I think of configuration service providers as similar to programming APIs, right? These are interfaces that are designed to handle certain configurations. And when a configuration is deployed from an MDM solution such as Intune onto the device, it will be in a format that can be consumed by this particular configuration service provider built into Windows 10. Again, there's a bunch of them. One of them is called the Policy Configuration Service Provider. It has a whole, it's one of the biggest configuration service providers that we have, and it contains a bunch of settings, right? And so when that payload of settings, and you'll see an example of that in a minute, when the payload of settings comes down, then the configuration service provider knows how to handle it and put it into place, right? And again, Policy CSP is the one for administrative templates. There's a bunch of configuration service providers, and in each one, a bunch of configurations that can be done. Enough to say about that, except to say this. Every single setting that you see in Intune, in the UI of Intune, ultimately is translated into a configuration against the various configuration service providers in play. You just don't see it because it's a nice user interface that means you don't have to deal with that. But there are places that you will. And specifically, if you're going to do anything in the custom world, you'll need to deal with and understand these configuration service providers. I'm going to show you an example of that when we talk about ADMX ingestion, right? You do that with the policy configuration service provider and a custom configuration profile. In fact, you see policy here. This is using the policy configuration service provider. And so, again, I'll show you an example of that in a minute. Another thing to be aware of is that when these, again, there's two kinds of templates, if you will. There are templates that are shipped with Windows, or there are templates that are ingested to the device through the policy CSP. The ADMX templates themselves are the files that are located in the system root directory policy definitions folder, and they are processed and turned into MDM policies at OS build time. Right? Again, ADMX files are not pivotal to MDM. Yeah, they are used as a basis for MDM, but the configuration of those settings goes through the MDM channel separate and apart from group policy, right? Then there's settings that are the ADMX files that you ingest and translate into MDM policies. These are translated and processed after the OS shipment and through the policy CSP. Again, a little bit of minutia there, but I'll show that to you. And I've said it multiple times just to say it again. Policy CSPs are how you do Intune. These are not the equivalent of the group policy, or they are not dependent upon the group policy service. There is no reliance on any aspect of the group policy service. The policy CSP and the ADMX templates that are configured through the policy CSPs are equivalents of group policy, but they are not the same, right? Not the same at all. Now, when you look at the UI, it's going to be familiar in terms of configuring this. You see the highlighted section that I have here, where we will describe, I just picked a random setting. We'll describe the setting. We'll give you the options enabled, disabled, not configured. And in some cases, we'll need additional detail, in this case, the maximum log size, right? This should look very, very familiar if you've ever played with this in the group policy editors or whatever else. But this is through MDM. So here's the thing. When you actually set some of these configurations, there's certain things that actually happen on the device to get those configurations sent down. There's basically a policy configuration that goes down to the device. So let's kind of step through this. If you're an administrator and you're setting this particular policy to enable, then what happens is the MDM solution is going to set an action called a replace action. We're going to replace the existing setting, and it's going to send that command down through what's called a syncml command, and that payload is going to contain the user entered data for this particular policy setting. The MDM client stack receives it, processes it, and puts it in place. All of that happens with the policy CSP, right? Now, same kind of thing, you could set disabled. Well, if you set disabled, again, you're changing the config from other than what it was, and so we go through the same process. When you, as the administrator, click apply, then we're going to send down a syncml command, again, a replace syncml command, with a payload that contains your data, and the MDM client stack is going to evaluate it and apply it to the device by either deleting the device's registry, setting the registry key, or both as needed, right? Then there's the third option of not configured. Here, when you select apply, then what's going to happen is a delete syncml command is going to go down with the payload to the device. The MDM client stack is going to receive it, and this causes the policy CSP to actually delete the device's registry per the policy that is coming down to the device, right? Again, minutia, yes. Do you ever have to really worry about that? Maybe not, maybe so. It depends on your config, right? If you're going to be using the custom configuration service provider through the policy CSP, then you do need to have an awareness of kind of how this works, right? Otherwise, you don't. It just happens behind the scenes. But what I wanted to show you is kind of how this looks. Not that you really ever probably have to design that very much, but I mentioned syncml. So if you do an enabled syncml request, it'll look something similar to this, right? You'll have your direct link to your configuration service provider. This is the policy configuration service provider, and then you will have your payload, which will describe the configuration that you're putting in place and the settings and different things, right? So this is how we would set. Now, if we're doing a delete, very simple command, delete, right? Or disabled. Not configured would be something like this. And that's all I'm going to say about these configs, not to belabor that point. If you want to see more, search at this link and you will see a few more examples. I can probably find a few more even beyond that, right? Okay. Now, how do we actually set this up? What are the options? So as we look at it, I want to start with just some traditional group policy settings and then ease our way to what the options are in the Intune console and then go from there. So I'm going to open up the MMC and pull in, this is just on my local PC, but same difference. If we looked at group policy at the domain level, same kind of thing. I'm just going to add this in for my local computer and then open up and scroll down to computer configuration. I'm going to resize these windows because I don't like them. Go down to computer configuration and administrative templates. So this is the main section where we're going to find a lot of the settings that we care about. These other sections above, you can get to some of these settings. You'll see them in a minute, so don't think I'm just exclusively at this area. You'll see in a moment in Intune how you will see a very similar kind of hierarchical structure of this, right? But if I go down to Windows Component, and I'm just picking one in general, setting in general. If I go down to Windows Components and then scroll down to Windows PowerShell, for example, I will see turn on PowerShell script block logging, right? And I can go see a description of it. I can see a check mark to turn that on, not configured, enabled, disabled. So this is very, very familiar. This is the way it appears in the group policy object editor or your local policy, whichever. So I'm going to go ahead and close that. All right. Now, let's go look at this in Intune. So if I go look in Intune and go to devices, because that's where our configuration profiles are, and then under devices, go to Windows, because that's where we're talking about group policy type things, and go to configuration profiles, right? The first thing, when I create a new one, create the new profile, and then I will choose the OS, Windows 10 and later in this case, and the profile type. Now, I have a couple of choices here, and I will show you both of those as we go along here. But for now, I'm just going to do templates, right? So I'm going to start with templates. I'll show you settings catalog in a moment. And I'm just going to start with administrative templates, right? And so administrative templates, great. I'm going to scroll. I've chosen that. I'm going to scroll down. I'm going to select create. And so I'll get a profile created that's going to be based off of the administrative template, right? And I'm just going to give it a garbage name for now and click next. Really, I'm doing this just to show you what you can kind of see and how it navigates around in this, right? So by default, I'm focused in on the computer configuration. Well, I can do user configuration too. If I want, I can do all settings if I want. Let's start with computer configuration. So I showed you where I found that one PowerShell setting in the local group policy on the local computer. If I scroll down, you will see settings that are categorized here in a kind of a hierarchy. If you makes it easier to navigate. If I want control panel things, I can go there. If I want some of the edge things, I can go here. Office things, I can go there. But if I scroll on down, then I will see Windows components. So Windows component, and here's system and start menu and all these other things. Windows components is where I was when I got to the PowerShell settings. So I'll click on that, scroll back down. And then I have to scroll down and advance the screen to the next page. And I will see Windows PowerShell right here. Oops, right here. Right. And now that I click that, I'm into the settings for Windows PowerShell. And over on the group policy editor, I did the turn on PowerShell script block logging. Well, that's here as well. So if I click on it, it's going to give me a pop-up. And that pop-up is very similar to the group policy editor. It gives me a good description of it, right? And gives me the options to enable, disable, not configured, and also the check mark that we saw in group policy editor to log script block invocation start stop events, right? So that's really straightforward, really easy to get into this and be able to browse it, look around. Very familiar type of environment for folks who would be dealing with policy. Now, here's a good time to, again, remind of what I said. Not every single thing that is in policy, Windows policy, will be translated one-to-one to Intune. There are options to add settings that are missing using the policy CSP. I'll tell you more about that shortly. But before you just carte blanche decide, oh, that's missing, let's add it, here's an opportunity to do what, frankly, we should be doing all the time anyway, and that is critically evaluate whether the existing settings you have configured should be basically lifted and shifted over to Intune, or whether the existing settings might be outdated and there's a better way to do it now, and we want to use that better way to do it, right? A good opportunity to do that, right? Okay, so that's just basic. Let me show you another example, and we'll keep playing around a little bit. Back to devices and Windows and configuration profiles. So I have one over here. Let me get this blown back up. Okay, so here's based on, let's see, which one do I want? Okay, let's do this one. Administrative templates, Admx. So this is one that I just have created, right? And oh, I don't want to show you that one yet. Let me. Okay, yeah, we will. Sorry, I'm trying to figure out. Do I want to use one that I've created? Do I not? Whatever. That's okay. Let's just go into properties. And so I'm going to pull up all settings, configuration settings here. And so again, really to get familiar with the UI, right? All settings. So notice what I did here. So I showed you computer configuration a second ago. Here I'm showing you all settings. And those settings that I actually have enabled, they come to the top here. So if you're ever looking at a policy and you want to see what the ones are that are configured as enabled or not enabled or disabled or whatever, right? You can see those configurations at the top. You can see both device and user settings under all settings. And so it's a really nice way to get a quick view. Now, what you don't get with all settings is the nice organized hierarchical view of the settings that you would get maybe with something like user configuration or computer configuration, but you definitely can see the things there that you would care about. Right now, let's go back to all settings. Right, maybe you don't want to sift through all of these because there's bunches of them. Let me show you. If I scroll down and just look, there's 222 pages of these settings. Right, so lots of settings that are in here. Right, so we've already shown you the detail page that'll come up by selecting a setting, right? Setting, summary, configuration options, whatever else. But you can also, in this page, if you know that you are trying to find, for example, a particular type of setting, like let's go up here, and then maybe I care about DNS, right? I can type DNS, and all of the settings that have DNS in the name will be displayed and filtered, or DHCP, something like that you'll see. Or maybe I want to focus on network, right? And whatever. So you can just sit here and filter and pull the settings that you care about. Even if I wanted to do something like Bluetooth, right? It'll pull the settings that are related to Bluetooth and so on, right? So a nice ability to use the search bar and explore. I mentioned there's office settings in here. Maybe I want to do something related to OneNote. Well, there are all the OneNote settings, or OneDrive, right? And I could just sit here and do this all day, but I won't belabor that point. I just want to show that to you, right? Okay, cool. Now, this is administrative template. This is it's put these two together. There are two pathways to get into this configuration. One is through templates, which I showed you, right? So using the template option to get into administrative templates. That's the first pathway we've gone. There's another option, which is the settings catalog. The two will allow you to do the same thing. It's just a different way in which you get there, right? There's a guided one way is a certain set of experiences, and another way is not. So, for example, with the settings catalog, you're not going to see exactly the same hierarchical representation. You will see it, but different. Let me show you. So if you click on this and I want to go add a setting, then I can go in and I can choose administrative templates. And I can navigate down through the window like I did with the other one, like here's Windows Components. And then if I scroll down, I will see Windows PowerShell right here, right? And that's as far as I can go. With the templates approach, I could navigate that hierarchy kind of in a folder form. And then when I clicked on Windows PowerShell, I saw the available settings that I can configure. Here, I do as well, but not the same way, right? When I click on Windows PowerShell, then I have to scroll all the way to the bottom, and now I will see the PowerShell related settings. So I'm going to select all settings in this category, and then I'm done with my settings catalog. I've chosen the settings I care about. So I'm just going to exit out of here. And now the settings that I have available to me are all listed here. I can configure them, not configure them, whatever I want to do through a different kind of a UI, but it is still the same type of UI like this one. Turn on PowerShell script block logging. That was configured by either selecting enable, disable, or not configured in the templates approach. Here, I just turn it on. And then this was enabled by selecting that check mark on the previous approach. Here, I just have to move the slider to turn it on, right? So it's up to you which one you use. One might be preferable to you versus another. So again, up to you. But I wanted to show you both so you got a sense kind of what the options were depending on which option you did in fact choose. So I will say this as well. There are, I showed you a setting that is at parity between the templates approach and the settings catalog approach. You'll find a lot of agreement between the templates and the settings catalog approach. However, you will find that there are more settings available in the settings catalog than there are through the template options. So make sure you're aware of that when you are configuring your options so that you don't miss something that is in fact in the UI. Okay, so let's keep it going here. So I'm going to close this out, and now we'll move into what I call the in action part of the discussion, right? The walkthrough, just to kind of give you a sense of what's there. In action, typically, I would show you configurations that are actually working. Here, I'm not really taking it all the way down to the device level, but I do want to show you a couple of specific configurations. So let me pull, and honestly, I'm just picking a few configurations to demonstrate this. There are so many configurations here. I could just sit and pick configuration after configuration after configuration. And that wouldn't really help you. What helps you is to understand what's here and how you can use it and how you can configure it. So let's go to the next level again. I'm going to go back to Windows and devices or configure, dang it, devices and configuration profiles for Windows. Here, and configuration profiles. Okay, so I have a couple. So I have the administrative templates Admx. This is one I popped open just a moment ago. And again, just as a reminder of a couple of things I've already shown you, but let's go through them again, right? So if I go to properties on this, it's really nice because I can go down to my configuration settings and I can edit them for sure. But you can see right here the different settings that are part of this particular configuration. If I go into edit, right, then again, computer configuration is highlighted by default, even with the brand new blank policy certainly here. And you can just because that's where you start doesn't mean that's where you have to end. You can certainly go to all settings. Again, you can see, like I showed you a moment ago, that all of the configured settings that are enabled, or I don't have any that are disabled, but if they're disabled, they'll be at the top. And then those that are not configured are down below, right? So a nice little demonstration there of that. Well, so just like I have Admx through the template, I have some Admx through, or a sample profile through the settings catalog. So let's go look at that as soon as this loads. Come on. Okay, so it loaded. So here's another one that I did, just administrative templates, this time based on the settings catalog. And here I'll just show you a couple of things. Notice the UI here is a little bit different, but still the assignments section is here. I can click on edit for that. And then, no, that's not what sorry, I apologize, going back. I want to edit my configurations. That's what I want. I clicked on assignments. So here's my configuration settings, and I can see here those things that are configured. So I can tell right away that I have my WinRM settings configured, so I can go edit that and see that these are the settings that are configured, right? But I can go add more. So just because these are all the settings that I have doesn't mean that's it. I can remove categories. I can actually set to not configured by hovering over this button, right? So it doesn't have to be disabled or enabled. I can even set it to not configured. Or I can add additional settings if I want to. I can browse down and grab some from there to augment what I have set up in this configuration. Okay, and so again, not intending to walk through every setting. I just want you to know how we can configure things. All right, so let me go back out of the console for a minute. So another thing that you can do, let me show this to you. I've already got it set up here, right? Let me go back a level. Here we go. Windows. All right, cool. So another configuration profile that I have, in fact, I have 5 of them because I just haven't cleaned it up. Script that will build an administrative template configuration. So I want to show that to you, right? Because there could be some scenarios where instead of clicking through the UI, you might want to have a script that will go create an administrative template configuration for you and or even read what's out of an administrative template. And so it's very possible to do that with Graph. I'm going to show you just the basics. I'm not going to really configure anything. When we're done, there will be a 6th version of this because I haven't cleaned it out. But let me show you what I'm talking about. All right. So the first thing to understand is you need to get your environment configured and ready for this to work. So in order to do that, I'm going to launch PowerShell, and I'm going to launch it as an administrative PowerShell option. Right. So now PowerShell is loaded. I've already got this configured, but I want to show you all the way through. So the first thing that I would do if I was going to set this up from scratch is I would set my execution policy to unrestricted, right? Because I will be doing some scripting here in a minute. Unrestricted, not unrestricting. There we go. And I've already done it, but there we go, right? Okay, and then the next thing I need to do to have access to some of the commands I'll need is install the let's see, name, Microsoft Intune graph.intune module. So I'm going to install that module, and it's already installed. It'll take a second to recognize that, and then it would give me other options if it weren't already installed, but it is, and so I'm good. Right now, the next thing I need to do is go retrieve the PowerShell SDK focused on Intune from GitHub. Right, so the way I'm going to do that is open a browser. I'm going to pause the video just long enough to open the browser and show you the URL, and I'll be back. Okay, so I went ahead and opened it, and this is the URL that I'm actually accessing for the Intune Powershell SDK. And so on this URL, which is GitHub, basically I have this zip file that I need to download. So I've got it downloaded. I've got it extracted, right? And you can extract it wherever you would like to. I actually put it on my desktop, probably not the best place, but for a demo like this, it's fine. And then there will be certain things out of that we need to access. So I'm not going to download it again. I have downloaded it, I have extracted it, and I'm going to show you where it is. So let me pull up this, and I'm going to go to my desktop, right? So this is drop, and actually notice this is synchronized to OneDrive. You'll see that in a minute. But this is what I extracted. It's a folder called drop. And where I want to go, there's a couple of DLLs that are pivotal to what I need. It's going to be under this folder. And what I would need to do, what I need to do, I've already done it, so I'm not going to see it here. But I would go into each one of, I believe, my 4 DLLs, right-click, go to Properties, and then right up front, there would be an option to unblock this DLL. I've already unblocked it, which I don't see this option again because I've unblocked it. But you will need to unblock the DLL so the system can use it. That's just a security protection for downloaded files out there. But do that, and then once you unblock it, you're ready to go with PowerShell. So for ease of execution, I'm just going to change directory to that so I don't have to type it again and again. So user, oops, sorry. And then to me, and then because this is redirected to OneDrive, I'm going to go to my OneDrive and then desktop there. And if I do a directory, I see that I have drop, right? Okay, so now I'm good. So what I need to do is just simply start to work with this and add some different things, right? So the first thing, before I can do anything at all, I need to authenticate with my Intune environment. So I'm going to, actually, before I do that, I do need to authenticate with my Intune environment, but there's a piece in here that I need to import. So I'm going to go on down further a little bit, and then on further, and then here. All right, on further. Great, and then .NET. Okay, great. So there is a PowerShell module, PSD1, right there that I need to import. So I'm going to import that module, and then I will have the commands that I need. So import module, Microsoft.graph.intune.psd1. Cool. And so, yes, I'm going to run this, and I'm going to run it, and I'm good, right? Okay, great. So now that I've done that, now I'm ready to start using these commands, and I need to authenticate. Sorry, one more thing that I forgot because I've already done it is there's 2 actual paths for the Intune Graph API. There's version 1 and there are beta commands, and these actually use beta commands. And so I need to update my PowerShell environment to use beta by default. So update MS Graph environment, and I want to use schema version beta in quotes. Okay, so now I've done it. And now it's time to connect to my Intune environment to authenticate. Then I can use everything. So connect MS Graph and admin consent, which is going to pop up. What did I do? Connect. I didn't type graph correctly. Admin consent. Okay, so now it's going to pop up a box to ask me to authenticate. I'm going to click on my user and provide a password. And now I will be authenticated. I'll make sure the permissions are good. I'll be authenticated into the environment, right? So I'm ready to go. I'm authenticated. And so now what I need to do is just simply execute the PowerShell commands to both create a configuration profile that is using the administrative template, and then I'm also going to show you one where I can just read whatever's in the environment for the various configurations I have. Now, this is very simple. I'm going to show it to you. It's very simple. All it's going to do is create a shell, but there's a lot of potential power in this. Power in terms of possibly automating the build of some of these administrative templates, maybe thinking through this as an option to augment migration whenever you do that. The other thing, again, to augment migration is there is the potential that some settings could maybe get confused when you do the migration. Hopefully not, but it's always that potential. And so kind of as a fail-safe, it might be worthwhile to loop through your environment with Graph and just see, hey, which all of my settings have this particular configuration, or whatever else you care about doing. And that's certainly a possibility with Graph. So let me copy and paste a given configuration over here because it's easier than typing it. And I will paste it over here, and hopefully it runs without a problem. So here it is, and it's waiting for my input. You can see the double prompt. I'll just hit enter in a minute. But basically, I'm going to invoke my Microsoft Graph request, give it the Graph command. I'm going to do group policy configurations, and then here's the content I'm going to create. So again, this is just going to create a shell, and then finally, I'm going to post that command, which is actually going to create it. So if I hit enter, then I'll get a confirmation back, hey, I posted this. And a second ago, I showed you 5 items in the list because I'd repeated this multiple times. Now there will be 6, right? Before I go back and show you that, let me show you this other one too, because again, really simple, but just showing you what's possible here, right? If I want to use Graph instead to read what's possible and see what's possible, then I can just invoke the method and this time do a get, and it's going to show me the various configurations that are out there. Now, you'll want to format this in a way that's more readable, probably, and easier to get, and so on, right? But it at least shows you, this is a real possibility to use it this way without any problem, right? So let's go back to the Intune console, and I will show you now that we actually have 6 iterations of this instead of 5 that we started with. So here are the 5 right at the bottom. If I go refresh this, then now we will have 6 because of me running that script multiple times. And so here now we have 6, right? Okay, simple demo, but hopefully you see the power of that. And if you do, then I've succeeded with that particular demo. Last thing that I want to show you, but again, very powerful. So I've mentioned using the built-in templates to access your administrative templates, using the built-in settings catalog to access your administrative templates, that there's actually more settings in the settings catalog than there are just in the templates option. But still, there could be some scenarios where you want to add something into the system that isn't in the UI now, right? And you can certainly do that, right? What this is called is ingesting an ADMX. And so the idea here is you would take an ADMX file and you would ingest it into Intune using the policy CSP. And when you ingest it, you're going to target it to your devices so that basically you're enabling those devices to know about these configurations. And then in a second step, you can actually deploy configurations with this, right? So 2-step process. The first is ingesting the ADMX and deploying that out to your devices so that your devices learn about those settings and those settings can be configured. And then the second step would be to introduce a configuration that would then actually configure those settings on the device, right? I'm going to show you step 1 of this. And I'm going to show you step 1 of this using the ADMX supplied by Google Chrome. Could be any ADMX, right? That's fine, but it's convenient. I'm going to use Google Chrome. And so here's the way you do it. To both ingest the ADMX and then also configure it, both steps 1 and 2, you're going to use the custom administrative or the custom option when you build your configuration profile, and use it twice, once to ingest and the second time to configure. So here's my ingest configuration, right? Again, using Google Chrome. And so if I go to properties here and look at my configuration, or here's my OMA URI setting. Go to configuration, edit. And so this is really not that challenging. It's just one setting here. So I'm going to click edit. And there's a few things to call out. Just name it whatever you want. And then here is the specific path to the Admx ingestion. It is part of the policy CSP. See that here. And then you see that we're using the Admx install. That's in the path, right? And then finally, we're doing the Chrome Admx, right? And then this is the actual text of the Admx that I got from Google. And so this is basically defining what can be done. And not to belabor the point here, right? Now, I can then assign this to my devices, and then once my devices receive that configuration and apply it, now they're ready to receive the settings related to this. And so for the actual settings, I would use this a second time with a different template with those settings set, and then when they arrive at the device knows what to do with them, right? So again, that's as far as I'm going to carry this, but I wanted to show this to you because it will unlock some things that you might not otherwise know how to do. And again, I would use this with caution. If there's a custom, or if you're using this to apply Admx, always ask the question, do I need to apply this Admx? Is there some other thing that's out there that I can use instead that is more up to date? Whatever, right? Okay. Now, we've talked a lot about building these configurations. What I've not done anything with, and I'm really not going to do much with here, is assigning these. I'm not assigning these to devices to get them deployed to the device. That's beyond where I want to take it right now. But I do want to have a bit of an assignment discussion. And here's where I want to discuss it, right? When we're thinking about translating from on-prem GPO to MDM, a question comes in about, okay, well, how do I assign these, right? A very common discussion is, I have these organizational units in on-prem AD that I use to assign my policy, but I don't have that in Azure Active Directory, so how do I do it? How do I assign these? And the answer is that you're going to use groups to assign these, Azure AD groups to assign these different configurations in Intune. But then the question inevitably comes around, well, I need to have flexibility in how I assign this. So do I build massive numbers of groups for every iteration possible? And certainly you could go that route if you wanted to, but there are several different levers, if you will, that we can pull to help you hone in your configuration the way that you want it to be deployed. The first one is assignments, right? So yeah, you're going to need a group or groups to which you're going to assign a given configuration. And so here I can just add a group, and I'll just add a random group. It doesn't matter, right? I can do whatever group I want. Any group I've created, any of the default groups that are out there, all systems if I wanted to, or all devices if I wanted to, all users if I wanted to, whatever, right? And so, but then we get into discussion. What do? I don't want to create all of these groups. Is there a way to help me on top of that? Well, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of options. Again, there's groups. Got to have a group to start with to target. Then there's group exclusions, where you can kind of filter the group by building another group and excluding certain things. But then there's another option, which is scope tags, which we can talk about. In fact, there's a whole session that I did on scope tags to really define how to use them, and they could be very helpful to defining what configurations are visible and even assignable and different things in different scenarios, right? But then there's yet another option, and it's right here. It's in preview currently. We call it in the console filter previews. But one way you'll see it referred to in our documentation is assignment filters. So the way this works, think of it, an assignment filter, as being an overlay on top of a group so that you can literally deploy your configuration, whatever it is, right? Not just assignment filters, but really anything, software, whatever, to a group that has more members than you really want, and then overlay this assignment filter to literally filter the members of the group to a subset that you do want to have that configuration. And so, just to pick numbers, say that your group that you're targeting has 1,000 members, but you only really want this configuration to go to 100 members of that group, then you could conceivably accomplish this with assignment filters, right? I'm going to give you an example of assignment filters that comes from working with a customer that doesn't really line up directly with administrative templates, but it gives you an illustration of how this works, right? So uh, this customer was working to enroll devices, and they wanted to get configurations like software and different configuration profiles, compliance settings, whatever, down to the device very, very quickly. And so the approach they initially took was that they would build their own group for those devices and then target the configurations to those devices, right? So when a device enrolled, the first thing that would have to happen is it would need to be evaluated. And after that evaluation, it would be placed into this custom group. And then whatever's targeted to the custom group would then be eligible to go down to the device. Well, what they were seeing was that these configurations would sometimes apply in 10 minutes, sometimes it would take 45 minutes, sometimes 30 minutes, right? It was inconsistent. Well, why was it inconsistent? It was because their custom group would evaluate and update on a schedule, but it was not always in the same place. Meaning maybe the group would update within 30 minutes or whatever, but maybe when they enrolled the device, the group was 5 minutes past its last evaluation, and so it had 25 minutes to go or whatever, right? And so what they wanted is a way to consistently have speed and predictability when they targeted. So they were getting frustrated. I'm like, no, we can do that. We can do that with assignment filters. And the way we ended up doing it is when those devices enroll, they will immediately pretty much show up in the all devices group. And so the solution was to take these various configurations and deploy them to the all devices group. But then here, put on an assignment filter that would say, yeah, but you only get this if you are both in this all devices group, which is populated pretty much immediately, and meet the conditions of this filter, right? And so that's, again, not an administrative template example, but a good example of using assignment filters that could easily be translated perhaps to something like administrative templates, right? Just to give you an example. So as you approach this, as you're thinking about doing your assignments and different things, realize there's a number of levers that we can pull that you may not be aware of, but think through those. There's also, in some scenarios, role-based access control that could be brought to bear and different things, right? So I'll leave that topic there. So starting to close out of the discussion here, in terms of troubleshooting tips and tricks. So one thing to understand about troubleshooting is especially when we think in terms of something like administrative templates or Admx type stuff, right? We think in terms of where these settings might get stored when we apply them. So group policy settings, for example, they will be applied to the registry. Well, so will MDM settings. Ultimately, they will be applied to the various registries. But if you're looking to see where something is configured, for example, if we actually have the right configuration in place, there could be a couple of different places that you look. For example, there's the registry itself, but then there's the section of the registry where MDM configurations themselves are stored. And they aren't the same, right? In some cases, they might be the same depending on what you're doing, like with these settings, when you're applying these GPO-like settings, they're going to end up being in the same registry location in many cases, but not always. Will you look there, you'll see some things that are maybe uniquely manifested in the MDM section. I'll leave that there for now, and because there's a lot, potentially around that, but just know that. And then in terms of tips and tricks, we've mentioned this several times through this session, but I don't want to I want to mention it again because it is so very important, and that is when you're in an ecosystem with a domain controller and group policy type configurations, then those group policies are automatically added to the registry of your client computers or the user profile by the administrative templates client-side extension known as CSE whenever the client computer processes group policy, right? Well, I've mentioned a couple of times that it is absolutely unrelated to group policy whenever we process these things through MDM. And so basically, in an MDM managed environment, the ADMX files are leveraged to define the policies, but they are independent of group policies. What this means is in an MDM managed client, a group policy infrastructure, including the group policy service that we see, gpsvc.exe, is absolutely not required. Not at all, right? And so what that also means is that some of the things kind of inherent with group policies are not going to be such a struggle with MDM solutions. Like one of the discussions that I had recently, or sessions that I recorded recently, was on endpoint analytics. And one of the metrics that we look for in endpoint analytics is slow group policy processing time. And so when I had this discussion, someone asked me, hey, is there something similar so that we can see if there's delays when MDM provided policies are implemented versus GPO, whenever we finally move to MDM versus using GPO? And the answer is no, there's not. Why? Because it's a completely different mechanism that does not rely the same way on the group policy structure at all. And the delays, for example, that you might see during login, that really doesn't apply because it's going through a completely different channel, right? So very key point, definitely wanted to leave you with. And with that, we are done. So I will end the session here and welcome you into this journey. There's a lot of nuance to it, but a lot of fun, a lot of possibilities. So definitely get started if you haven't already. And so we'll wrap the session here and we will see you next time.